The gunshot echoed through the empty Colorado prairie as Lucas Keller watched the last wagon of his family's caravan disappear over the horizon, leaving nothing but dust and betrayal in its wake. The year was 1876, and at 26 years old, Lucas had just been abandoned by the only people he'd ever called kin. Blood seeped through his fingers where he clutched his side. The bullet his own brother had put there still burning like hellfire. They'd taken everything: his horse, his savings, even his father's pocket watch, leaving him for dead beside a lonely creek with nothing but the clothes on his back and the gun at his hip. "Breathe," Lucas whispered to himself, his voice rough from disuse. Just breathe. He'd survived worse, he told himself, though at the moment he couldn't recall when. 3 days he spent in that spot, drinking creek water and fighting off fever, before he could stand without the world spinning. On the fourth morning, he began the long walk toward what he hoped was civilization, following the wagon tracks until they disappeared into hard-packed earth. The sun beat down mercilessly as Lucas trudged across the open plain. His dark brown hair, usually hidden beneath a hat he no longer possessed, was matted with sweat and dirt. His blue eyes, once bright with hope for new beginnings in Montana territory, were now dull with pain and betrayal. By nightfall, Lucas could make out the faint glow of lanterns in the distance. Either he'd found a town, or delirium had finally claimed him. He prayed for the former as he stumbled forward, his wounded side screaming in protest with every step. Maple Creek was hardly more than a collection of wooden buildings clinging to existence along a dusty road, but to Lucas, it might as well have been paradise. He made it as far as the steps of what appeared to be a general store before his legs gave out beneath him. "Lord have mercy," a woman's voice said from somewhere above him. "Nancy, Nancy, come quick. There's a man collapsed outside." Lucas fought to keep his eyes open as gentle hands turned him over. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was a pair of concerned green eyes framed by auburn hair. "Don't you die on me, stranger," the woman said firmly. "We've had enough death in this town to last a lifetime." When Lucas next opened his eyes, he was lying on a soft bed in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through a nearby window, casting warm patterns across a simple wooden floor. The pain in his side had dulled to a persistent ache rather than the sharp agony he'd grown accustomed to. "Well, look who's rejoined the land of the living." Lucas turned his head to see a woman seated in a rocking chair near the bed. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with those same striking green eyes he vaguely remembered from before. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days. "Where am I?" Lucas asked, his voice cracking from disuse. "My home," she answered simply. "Above the general store. I'm Nancy Elliott." She stood, moving to pour water from a pitcher on the bedside table. "The doctor said you're lucky to be alive. That bullet nearly took out your kidney." Lucas accepted the water gratefully, drinking deeply before speaking again. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. "You've been in and out with fever." Nancy took the empty glass. "Care to tell me how you came by a bullet hole?" Lucas stared at the ceiling. "My brother shot me." Nancy's eyebrows rose, but she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she busied herself checking his bandages. "My family was headed to Montana territory," Lucas continued, unsure why he was telling this stranger his troubles. "We'd been on the trail for weeks. I caught my brother stealing from our shared funds. When I confronted him, he shot me and convinced the others I'd been the thief." He closed his eyes against the memory. "They left me for dead." Nancy's hands paused in their work. "That's quite a story, Mr. Keller." "Lucas Keller." "Well, Mr. Keller, it seems you're in need of some help. Lucky for you, Maple Creek could use another pair of hands." She stood back, assessing him with those piercing green eyes. "Once you're healed, of course." "I can't pay you," Lucas admitted. "They took everything." Nancy smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. "We'll work something out. Rest now. We can discuss your future once you've gotten your strength back." Over the next week, Lucas slowly regained his strength under Nancy's care. He learned that she ran the general store alone since her father's death 6 months prior. At 24, she was unmarried, unusual for a woman in these parts, and seemed to be respected, if somewhat pitted, by the townsfolk who came to trade. "Your father left you the store?" Lucas asked one evening as Nancy sorted through the day's ledgers at the small table in her living quarters. He did, she replied without looking up, much to the dismay of his creditors, who thought I'd sell it off cheap and leave town. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. I disappointed them. Lucas was impressed. Women who ran businesses were rare enough, but one who did so successfully against the expectations of an entire town was rarer still. What brought your family through these parts? Nancy asked, changing the subject. Montana's still a hard land. My father heard there was good cattle country opening up, Lucas explained, shifting to find a more comfortable position on the bed. We sold our small place in Kansas to make the journey. And now? The question hung in the air. Lucas had been avoiding thinking about his future, about what he would do now that the life he'd planned had been stolen from him. I don't know, he admitted finally. I've got no money, no horse, nothing to my name except the clothes you washed for me. Nancy set down her pencil, giving him her full attention. What can you do, Lucas Keller? Besides get shot by family members. Despite himself, Lucas laughed. It hurt his side, but it felt good nonetheless. I can work cattle, break horses, build most anything that needs building. Nancy nodded thoughtfully. Maple Creek's growing. The railroad's supposed to put a stop here within the year. People need homes built, livestock tended. She tapped her fingers against the ledger. I know most folks in town. I could put in a word. Lucas studied her. This woman who'd saved his life and was now offering to help him rebuild it. Why would you do that for a stranger? Nancy's expression grew distant. Because someone once did the same for my father and me when we had nothing. She refocused on him. Besides, you're not exactly a stranger anymore, are you? 2 days later, Lucas took his first steps outside. Nancy's home above the general store opened onto a small balcony overlooking Maple Creek's Main Street. It wasn't much of a town, a saloon, blacksmith, small church, and a handful of other businesses, but it had a certain quiet dignity that appealed to Lucas. Sheriff Donovan says he could use help building a proper jail, Nancy said, joining him at the railing. The current one is just a reinforced storage room behind his office. Lucas nodded, feeling the warm spring air on his face. I can do that. And Mrs. Whitaker needs her barn repaired before winter. Her husband died last fall, and she's been struggling with the farm. I can do that too. Nancy smiled. See? You're already becoming indispensable. Lucas turned to face her. I can't keep staying in your home. People will talk. People always talk, Nancy replied with a shrug. But you're right. There's a room available at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. I've already spoken to her. With what money? Consider it an advance on the work you'll do for me. The store's storeroom needs reorganizing, and the roof leaks in 3 places. She straightened. All business now. You can work off your debt to me and earn your keep by helping around town. Lucas felt a strange mixture of gratitude and pride. He didn't want charity, but he needed help, and Nancy was offering it in a way that preserved his dignity. Thank you, he said simply. Nancy nodded once, as if the matter was settled. You start tomorrow. The next month passed in a blur of activity. Lucas moved into Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, a tidy 2-story building with 4 rooms for rent and strict rules about noise and visitors. His days were filled with work, first rebuilding Sheriff Donovan's jail, then fixing Mrs. Whitaker's barn, and in between, handling the various tasks Nancy assigned him at the store. To his surprise, Lucas found himself enjoying the work and the simple routine of small-town life. The people of Maple Creek were cautious at first, eyeing the newcomer with suspicion, but Nancy's endorsement carried weight. Gradually, he was accepted, if not yet fully embraced. You've got quite the champion in Miss Elliott, Sheriff Donovan commented one afternoon as they worked on the jail. The sheriff was a gruff man in his 50s, with a handlebar mustache and hands like leather. Never seen her take to someone so quick. Lucas paused in his hammering. She's been kind. Kind, sure, the sheriff agreed, measuring a board. But she's not one to suffer fools or take in strays. Makes me wonder what she sees in you. The implication wasn't lost on Lucas. It's not like that, he said firmly. She helped me when I needed it. I'm repaying the debt. Sheriff Donovan just smiled knowingly. If you say so, son. The truth was, Lucas didn't know exactly what his relationship with Nancy was. They worked together almost daily, shared meals occasionally, and talked about everything from the store's inventory to the latest town gossip. She was intelligent, witty, and possessed a practical wisdom that he admired. But she also maintained a certain distance, never revealing too much about herself or her past. "Where did you learn to keep books like this?" Lucas asked one evening as they reviewed the store's accounts. Nancy had invited him to dinner above the store, claiming they had too much work to finish before closing time. "My father insisted I learn," Nancy replied, adding a column of figures with practiced ease. "Said a woman needs to know numbers if she doesn't want to be cheated. He taught me to read contracts, too." "Unusual father." Nancy smiled slightly. He was an unusual man. Believed women had brains worth using. "Smart man." "He was," she agreed, a hint of sadness crossing her features. "I miss him every day." It was the most personal thing she'd shared with him, and Lucas recognized the significance. "What happened to him, if you don't mind my asking?" Nancy was quiet for a long moment. "Influenza," she finally said. "It swept through town last winter. Took 12 people, including my father." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Nancy squared the papers, clearly ready to change the subject. "Now, about these orders from Denver." As spring turned to summer, Lucas found himself increasingly settled in Maple Creek. The work was steady, and he'd begun saving money, not much, but enough that he no longer felt completely destitute. He'd even purchased a horse, a sturdy bay gelding he named Buck, from a passing trader. What surprised him most, however, was how often his thoughts turned to Nancy. He found himself looking forward to their work sessions, inventing reasons to visit the store, and feeling an unexpected surge of jealousy when other men in town paid her attention. "You should ask her to the Founders' Day dance," Mrs. Peterson suggested one morning as she served breakfast to her boarders. The older woman had taken a grandmotherly interest in Lucas, constantly offering advice he hadn't requested. "Who?" Lucas asked, though he knew perfectly well who she meant. Mrs. Peterson gave him a withering look. "Miss Elliott, of course. That poor girl hasn't been to a social event since her father died. All work and no play." She shook her head disapprovingly. "Not right for a young woman." "I'm sure if she wanted to go, she'd have no shortage of escorts," Lucas replied, trying to sound indifferent. "Oh, she's had offers," Mrs. Peterson confirmed with a knowing nod. "Turned them all down flat. But she might say yes to you." The thought stayed with Lucas all day as he worked on reinforcing the church's sagging roof. Would Nancy say yes if he asked? More importantly, should he ask? His life was still unsettled, his future uncertain. He had nothing to offer a woman like her. Yet that evening, he found himself standing in the general store just before closing time, hat in hand, words sticking in his throat as Nancy tallied the day's sales. "Did you need something, Lucas?" she asked, glancing up from her work. "I was wondering," he began, then stopped, suddenly nervous. "That is, I heard there's a dance. For Founders' Day." Nancy's expression revealed nothing. "Yes, next Saturday at the church. Would you want to go? With me?" The words tumbled out in a rush. For a moment, Nancy seemed genuinely surprised. Then a small smile curved her lips. "I'd like that." Relief flooded through Lucas. "Good. That's good. I'll pick you up at 7. Nancy nodded, her smile growing. 7 it is. As Lucas left the store, he couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. For the first time since being left for dead on that lonely prairie, he felt a glimmer of something like hope for his future. The Founders' Day dance was the social event of the summer in Maple Creek. The church had been transformed with paper lanterns and wildflowers, and nearly everyone in town was in attendance. Lucas had spent his meager savings on a new shirt and had his good pair of boots polished to a shine. When Nancy opened her door at exactly 7 o'clock, Lucas momentarily forgot how to speak. She wore a dress of deep green that matched her eyes, her auburn hair styled in an elegant arrangement of curls. She looked beautiful, and entirely unlike the practical shopkeeper he'd come to know. "You look..." Lucas struggled to find an adequate word. "Different," Nancy supplied, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Beautiful," Lucas said honestly, "though you always do." A blush colored Nancy's cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Keller." The dance was already in full swing when they arrived. Lucas felt the curious stares of the townsfolk as he escorted Nancy inside. Clearly, their appearance together was cause for interest. "Everyone's looking," Lucas murmured as they found seats near the punch table. "Let them," Nancy replied with an unconcerned shrug. It gives them something to talk about besides cattle prices and weather. Lucas laughed, feeling some of his tension ease. Would you like to dance? Nancy's smile was answer enough. As Lucas led her onto the floor, he silently thanked his mother for insisting he learn to dance properly as a boy. The band struck up a lively reel, and soon they were moving among the other couples, laughing as they navigated the steps. You're full of surprises, Lucas Keller, Nancy said as they twirled. I wouldn't have taken you for a dancer. My mother's influence, he admitted. She believed a gentleman should know how to dance. Nancy's expression grew thoughtful. You never speak of your mother. She died when I was 18. Consumption. Lucas guided Nancy through a turn. She was a good woman. Would have been ashamed of what my brother did. I'm sorry about your mother, Nancy said softly. And about what happened with your family. Lucas shook his head. Don't be. If they hadn't left me, I wouldn't be here now. His eyes held hers. I wouldn't have met you. The music slowed, and couples around them drew closer together. Lucas hesitated, but Nancy moved into his arms naturally, resting her hand on his shoulder as it settled at her waist. I'm glad you're here, she said simply, her green eyes earnest. In that moment, with Nancy in his arms and the soft music surrounding them, Lucas felt a sense of belonging he thought he'd lost forever. The betrayal of his family, the uncertainty of his future, none of it seemed to matter quite as much anymore. Later, as they walked back to Nancy's home under a canopy of stars, Lucas found himself reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you for coming with me tonight, he said as they reached her door. Thank you for asking, Nancy replied. She paused, keys in hand. Would you like to come up for coffee? Upstairs, Nancy lit a lamp and busied herself with the coffee pot, while Lucas stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware that this was the first time he'd been in her home since recovering from his injury. I've been meaning to ask, Nancy said as she set cups on the table. What are your plans now? Will you stay in Maple Creek? The question caught Lucas off guard. I hadn't thought much beyond the next job, to be honest. The railroad will be here by fall, Nancy continued, pouring the coffee. The town's growing. There will be opportunities. Lucas studied her, trying to read her expression. Are you suggesting I should stay? Nancy met his gaze steadily. I'm saying you could have a good life here, if you wanted it. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibility. Lucas took a step closer to her, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender in her hair. Nancy, he said softly, I need to know. What is this between us? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. I don't know, she answered honestly. I only know that when I saw you collapsed on my doorstep, something told me you were important. That you were meant to be here. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished. When she didn't, he gently cupped her cheek in his hand. I think maybe I was meant to find you. The kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as Nancy responded, her hands coming to rest on his chest. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing a little faster. I should go, Lucas said reluctantly. Nancy nodded, though her eyes told a different story. Probably wise. At the door, Lucas paused. May I call on you tomorrow? Properly, I mean. Nancy's smile was answer enough. Summer faded into autumn, and with it came the promised railroad. Maple Creek transformed almost overnight from a sleepy farming community into a bustling hub of activity. New businesses opened, houses sprang up on the outskirts of town, and the population nearly doubled as workers and opportunists arrived on the newly laid tracks. For Lucas, the changes brought steady work and growing prosperity. His reputation as a reliable builder spread, and soon he had more job offers than he could accept. By November, he had saved enough to purchase a small plot of land on the edge of town, with plans to build his own cabin before winter set in. His courtship of Nancy progressed just as steadily. They attended church together on Sundays, shared meals several times a week, and spent long evenings talking by the fire in her apartment. The town had long since accepted them as a couple, and even Mrs. Peterson had stopped making pointed comments about proper intentions. You've become quite the pillar of the community, Nancy teased one crisp October evening as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. I overheard Mayor Wilson saying you should consider running for town council next year. Lucas laughed, squeezing her hand where it rested in the crook of his arm. I think I'll stick to building things. Politics requires a different skill than hammering nails. You build more than structures, Lucas, Nancy said seriously. You've built relationships. Trust. People respect you. Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun cast a golden glow across her features, highlighting the auburn in her hair. The only person whose respect truly matters to me is yours. You've had that from the beginning, Nancy replied softly. Lucas took a deep breath. He had planned to wait, to have his cabin built first, but standing there with Nancy in the fading light, he couldn't imagine a more perfect moment. I love you, Nancy Elliott, he said simply. These past months, you've given me back everything I thought I'd lost. A home, a purpose. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small gold band he'd purchased from a traveling jeweler. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Nancy's eyes widened, then filled with tears. For a moment, Lucas's heart stopped, fearing he'd misread everything between them. Then she broke into a radiant smile. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Lucas Keller. The band slid perfectly onto her finger, and as Lucas gathered her into his arms, he silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought him, broken and betrayed, to Nancy's doorstep. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which continued well into the night at the saloon, temporarily transformed into a reception hall for the occasion. To the bride and groom, Sheriff Donovan toasted, raising his glass high. Two souls who found each other when they needed it most. Lucas and Nancy's cabin wasn't fully finished. Winter weather had delayed construction, but it was habitable, with a solid roof, sturdy walls, and a stone fireplace that kept the single large room warm despite the snow falling outside. It's perfect, Nancy declared as Lucas carried her across the threshold that night. She had insisted on helping with the building, learning to hammer nails and saw boards alongside him, her practical nature extending to home construction. It's not much, Lucas said apologetically, setting her down gently. Not compared to your apartment. It's ours, Nancy replied simply, reaching up to touch his face. That makes it home. Later, as they lay together in the new bed he'd crafted with his own hands, Nancy's head resting on his chest, Lucas felt a contentment he hadn't known was possible. I was thinking, Nancy said sleepily, tracing patterns on his skin. We should expand the store. With the railroad bringing more people, we'll need more inventory. Maybe add a section for building supplies, since the town's growing so fast. Lucas smiled in the darkness. Even now, his wife's practical mind was working. We'll need to hire help, he agreed. You can't run an expanded store and keep house here too. Nancy propped herself up on one elbow, her face serious in the faint glow from the fireplace. I was hoping we might make it a true family business. Not just you and me, but... Understanding dawned on Lucas. Children, Nancy nodded, a hint of vulnerability in her expression. I'd like that. Wouldn't you? Lucas pulled her close, his heart so full he thought it might burst. Nothing would make me happier than building a family with you, Nancy Keller. Spring brought new life to Maple Creek. The snow melted, revealing fresh grass and wildflowers across the prairie. Lucas and Nancy's cabin was finally completed, with a proper bedroom added and a small garden plot cleared behind the house. The general store, now renamed Keller and Elliott's Mercantile, had been expanded as planned, with a new section dedicated to building supplies and household goods. Life settled into a pleasant routine. Lucas divided his time between construction projects around town and helping at the store. Nancy managed their growing business with her usual efficiency, hiring a young clerk named Timothy to help with the increased customer traffic. In the evenings, they would sit on their small porch, watching the sunset and making plans for their future. It was on such an evening in late April that Nancy shared the news Lucas had been hoping to hear. Dr. Miller confirmed it today, she said, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby, Lucas. Around November, he thinks. Lucas could hardly contain his joy, lifting Nancy from her chair and spinning her around until she laughingly protested. Careful, I'm carrying precious cargo. He set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. A baby, he repeated in wonder. Our baby. The first of many, I hope, Nancy said with a smile. As spring turned to summer, Nancy's condition became visible, her slender frame now softly rounded with their growing child. Lucas found himself captivated by the changes in her body, marveling at the miracle they had created together. He became almost overprotective, insisting she rest more and delegate tasks at the store that he deemed too strenuous. "I'm with child, not made of glass," Nancy reminded him one July afternoon when he objected to her carrying a box of inventory. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, most of them while working fields or tending homes." "Humor me," Lucas replied, taking the box from her hands. "It's my job to worry about you both." Nancy softened, touching his cheek affectionately. "And you do it so well." The months passed in a blur of activity. Lucas added a nursery to their cabin, crafting a cradle from oak and a rocking chair for Nancy. The store continued to prosper, becoming the center of commerce for the growing town. And on a cold November night, just as the first snow began to fall, Nancy gave birth to their daughter. "She's perfect," Lucas whispered, cradling the tiny bundle in his arms. The baby had a dusting of dark hair like his own, and, when she briefly opened them, eyes that promised to be green like her mother's. "What shall we name her?" Nancy asked, exhausted but radiant in their bed. Lucas gazed down at his daughter, this miraculous new life. "How about Lily? After my mother?" "Lily Keller." Nancy tested the name. "It's beautiful." As winter settled over Maple Creek, the Keller household adjusted to life with a newborn. Lily proved to be a good-natured baby, with a strong set of lungs and an apparent curiosity about the world around her. Lucas found himself utterly enchanted by his daughter, often spending hours simply watching her sleep or responding with delight to her first smiles. "She has you wrapped around her tiny finger," Nancy observed one evening as Lucas paced the floor with Lily, singing softly to soothe her to sleep. "Guilty as charged," he admitted with a grin. "How could I not adore her? She's part of you." Nancy watched them with a contented smile. "I never thought I'd have this," she confessed. "After my father died, I resigned myself to running the store alone, maybe forever. I didn't dare hope for a family of my own." Lucas crossed to her side, carefully sitting beside her with Lily nestled in his arms. "I felt the same way after my family abandoned me. I thought I'd lost my chance at belonging somewhere." He looked from their sleeping daughter to his wife. "Instead, I found something better. I found you, and together, we've built this." Nancy leaned against his shoulder, her hand coming to rest on Lily's small back. "Our own family, made from scratch. Better than the one I was born into," Lucas agreed. "This one's built on love and choice, not just blood." As Lily grew from infant to toddler, the Keller family continued to thrive. The store expanded again, adding a second floor to accommodate more inventory. Lucas established himself as one of the premier builders in the county, with projects now coming from neighboring towns as well. And in the spring of Lily's second year, Nancy announced they would be welcoming another child. "A brother or sister for Lily," she told their daughter, who clapped her hands in delight, though she couldn't possibly understand the news. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked that night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the slight swell of Nancy's stomach. "Incredibly," she assured him. "Though we may need a bigger house if we keep expanding our family at this rate." Lucas chuckled. "I could add another bedroom to this one. Or—" he hesitated, unsure how Nancy would receive his idea. "Or what? I've been looking at that parcel of land on the north side of town. The one with the big cottonwood trees and the view of the mountains." Lucas had been saving money for months, squirreling away extra from each building project. "It's big enough for a proper house. Room to grow." Nancy was quiet for a moment. "That's prime land. It would cost a fortune." "I've been saving," Lucas admitted. "And with what the store brings in, I think we could manage it." Nancy shifted to look at him in the dim light. "You've been planning this." "Dreaming about it," he corrected. "A real home for our family. Something permanent." Nancy's expression softened. "You're thinking long-term." "I'm thinking forever," Lucas said simply. "This life we've built together, it's everything I never knew I wanted. You, the children, our business. I want to create something lasting, something our grandchildren will know came from us." Nancy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Lucas Keller, you continue to surprise me." She leaned forward to kiss him softly. "Let's do it. Let's build our forever home." The land purchase depleted much of their savings, but Lucas was confident in their future. Construction began in late summer, with Lucas overseeing every detail personally. The house would be substantial 2 stories, with 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a large front porch overlooking the valley. He wanted it completed before winter set in and their second child arrived. "It's going to be magnificent," Nancy declared one Sunday afternoon as they walked the property, Lily running ahead to chase butterflies. Nancy was 5 months along now, her pregnancy more noticeable this time. "Only the best for my family," Lucas replied, his arm around her waist. He still marveled sometimes at how far he'd come from that day when he'd been left for dead on the prairie. The betrayal of his blood family had led him to create something far stronger, a family built on love and choice rather than obligation. As autumn painted the cottonwoods gold, the new Keller home took shape. The framework rose against the sky, then walls, a roof, windows, and doors. Lucas worked alongside his hired men from dawn until dusk, determined to finish before the first snow. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Nancy admonished one evening when he returned home long after dark, exhausted and sore from a day of shingling the roof. "I want it ready for us," Lucas explained, washing trail dust from his hands. "For the baby." Nancy rested her hands on her rounded belly. "This little one isn't coming for another 3 months. There's time." "There's a storm brewing," Lucas countered, nodding toward the window where dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "I can feel it in my bones. If we don't get the roof finished this week, we'll lose time we can't afford." He was right. 2 days later, the first major storm of the season swept through, bringing driving rain that turned to sleet and then snow. But by then, the roof was complete, and work could continue inside the now weatherproof structure. November brought a surprise visit that would change the course of the Keller family forever. Lucas was at the new house, installing the kitchen cabinetry he'd crafted during the evenings, when Sheriff Donovan rode up with a grim expression. "Lucas," the sheriff called, dismounting stiffly. "Got a situation in town you should know about." Lucas set down his tools, wiping dust from his hands. "What is it?" "Stranger rode in this morning. Been asking about you." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Says he's your brother." Lucas felt as though he'd been plunged into ice water. "My brother? Which one?" "Calls himself Liam Keller. Dark hair, beard. Got a scar across his right cheek." Lucas's oldest brother. Not the one who'd shot him, but one who'd stood by and let it happen. "What does he want?" "Wouldn't say exactly. Just that he needs to speak with you on urgent family business." Lucas's mind raced. 3 years had passed since his family had left him for dead. Why would any of them seek him out now? "Where is he?" "Left him at the saloon. Told him I'd fetch you if you were willing to meet." Sheriff Donovan studied Lucas carefully. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to." Lucas considered his options. Part of him wanted to send Liam away without a word, to protect the life he'd built from the family that had betrayed him. But another part needed answers, needed to face his past before it could potentially harm his future. "I'll meet him," Lucas decided. "But first, I need to speak with Nancy." He found his wife at the store, reviewing orders with Timothy while Lily played with wooden blocks in a corner they'd set aside for her. Nancy took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked after sending Timothy to handle a customer. Lucas explained the situation, watching her expression shift from surprise to concern. "Do you think it's a trap?" she asked when he'd finished. "Could he mean you harm?" "I don't know," Lucas admitted. "Liam wasn't the one who shot me, but he didn't stop it either. We were never close." Nancy rested her hand protectively over her belly, her other reaching for Lily, who had toddled over, sensing the tension. "What will you do?" "Meet him. Hear what he has to say." Lucas's jaw tightened. "But I want you and Lily to stay at Mrs. Peterson's until I know it's safe." Nancy straightened, her green eyes flashing. "I will not hide while you face your past alone." "Nancy, no," she interrupted firmly. "Whatever this is, we face it together. That's what family does." In the end, they compromised. Lily would stay with Mrs. Peterson, while Nancy accompanied Lucas to the meeting at the saloon. Sheriff Donovan would be present as well, a precaution Lucas insisted upon. Liam Keller sat at a corner table, nursing a whiskey when Lucas entered the establishment. 3 years had aged his older brother considerably. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, and deep lines etched his weathered face. He stood when he saw Lucas, his expression a mix of relief and wariness. "Lucas," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're alive." "No thanks to our family," Lucas replied coldly, making no move to shake the hand Liam offered. Nancy stood at his side, her presence a steady comfort. Liam lowered his hand, acknowledging the rebuke with a nod. "I deserve that. We all do." His gaze shifted to Nancy. "This is your wife." Lucas performed a terse introduction. "My wife, Nancy Keller." "Nancy, my brother Liam." Nancy nodded politely, but made no move to sit as Lucas pulled out a chair for her. Only when she was settled did the men take their seats, Sheriff Donovan positioning himself at a nearby table. "Why are you here?" Lucas asked without preamble. Liam took a long breath. "It's a long story, but the short version is that everything fell apart after what happened to you." "You mean after you left me for dead with a bullet in my side?" Liam flinched. "Yes, that." He drained his whiskey. "Logan, he was the one who shot you. He took control. Convinced father you tried to steal the family money and run off. By the time we reached Montana, he'd turned everyone against each other." Lucas felt nothing but contempt. "And you're only now growing a conscience?" "I never believed Logan's lies," Liam insisted. "But I was a coward. I should have stood up to him, should have gone back for you." He rubbed a hand across his face. "By the time we reached Montana, it was too late. And then what? The land wasn't what we'd been promised. Barren, rocky, useless for cattle." Liam's expression darkened. "Father lost heart. His health failed within months. After he died, Logan gambled away what little we had left. The family scattered." Lucas absorbed this information silently. There was a time when news of his father's death would have devastated him, but now he felt only a distant sadness for a man who had believed the worst of his own son. "Why seek me out now?" Lucas asked finally. Liam reached into his coat, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. He placed it on the table between them. "I've spent 2 years tracking down what Logan stole and gambling away family heirlooms to buy them back." Lucas made no move to touch the pouch. "What is it?" "Mother's wedding ring. Father's pocket watch. The things that should have been yours by right." Liam pushed the pouch closer to Lucas. "I know it doesn't make up for what happened. Nothing could. But I needed to try to make something right." Lucas stared at the pouch, emotions warring within him. The pocket watch had been promised to him since childhood, a connection to his father he'd mourned losing almost as much as the man's trust. Nancy placed her hand over his. "You don't have to decide anything now," she said quietly. "There's more," Liam said, his gaze dropping to the table. "Logan's dead. Shot in a gambling dispute 6 months ago." Lucas felt Nancy's hand tighten on his. The brother who had shot him, who had turned his family against him, was gone. He searched himself for satisfaction or closure, but found only emptiness. "I'm sorry for your loss," Nancy said when Lucas remained silent. Liam looked up in surprise. "Thank you, madam." His gaze returned to Lucas. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth, and to return what rightfully belongs to you." "Where will you go now?" Lucas asked, finding his voice at last. Liam shrugged. "Not sure. West, maybe. California or Oregon." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Lucas felt the weight of the past and the pull of his present life in equal measure. Part of him wanted to send Liam away, to close the door on that chapter of his life forever. But another part, perhaps the better part, recognized that holding on to bitterness would only poison the happiness he'd found. "We're building a new house," Lucas said suddenly. "Could use an extra pair of hands to finish before winter sets in proper." Liam blinked in surprise. "Are you offering me work?" "Temporary," Lucas clarified, not yet ready to offer more. "Through the winter, at least. There's a boarding house with reasonable rates." Nancy squeezed his hand in silent support. "I'd be grateful," Liam said quietly. "More than you know." As they left the saloon, Nancy linked her arm through Lucas's. "That was a good thing you did," she said softly. "I'm not sure it was wise," Lucas admitted. "But I couldn't send him away, not with winter coming on." Nancy smiled up at him. "That's one of the reasons I love you. You build things, Lucas. Homes, businesses, relationships. Even when it would be easier to tear them down." Lucas drew her closer as they walked through the crisp autumn air. "I learned from the best," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You built me back up when I had nothing. How could I do less for others?" The next weeks brought unexpected healing. Liam proved to be a skilled carpenter and a dedicated worker. putting in long hours alongside Lucas to complete the new house before the heavy snows arrived. The brothers didn't speak much of the past, focusing instead on the tasks at hand, but gradually, a tentative trust began to rebuild between them. "He's good with Lily," Nancy observed one evening after Liam had spent an hour carving a tiny wooden horse for his niece. "She adores him." Lucas nodded, watching his daughter giggle as she played with her new toy. "He's trying to make amends in his own way." "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive him?" Nancy asked carefully. Lucas considered the question. "I think forgiveness is a process, not a moment," he said finally. "Each day, it gets a little easier to see him as my brother again, not as one of the people who left me to die." December brought heavy snow and the completion of the Keller home. It stood proudly against the white landscape, windows glowing with warm light, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Moving day was a community affair, with friends and neighbors helping transport furniture and belongings from the cabin to the new house. "It's magnificent," Nancy breathed as they stood in the completed home for the first time. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, the baby due in just a matter of weeks. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," Lucas said, his arm around her waist. Lily explored the new space with wide-eyed wonder, her small boots leaving tracks across the polished wooden floors. Christmas approached, bringing with it a sense of anticipation and joy. Lucas and Nancy decorated their new home with pine boughs and red ribbons, much as the church had been decorated for their wedding 3 years earlier. Lily, now old enough to understand the excitement of the holiday, chatted endlessly about the promised visit from Santa Claus. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a small gathering. Sheriff Donovan and his wife, Mrs. Peterson, Timothy from the store and his young wife, and Liam, who had become a regular visitor to their home. As they shared a festive meal around the large table Lucas had crafted, he found himself overwhelmed with gratitude for the life he'd found. "I'd like to propose a toast," Lucas said, rising to his feet with a glass of cider. "To family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose and build for ourselves." "To family," the guests echoed, raising their glasses. As Lucas resumed his seat, Nancy suddenly gasped, her hand going to her belly. "Nancy!" Lucas was instantly alert. "What is it?" She looked up at him, her green eyes wide. "I think your second child is eager to join the celebration," she said, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her voice. "My water just broke." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The female guests stayed to help, while Sheriff Donovan rode to fetch Dr. Miller. Liam took charge of entertaining Lily, keeping her distracted from the commotion surrounding her mother. Lucas remained at Nancy's side, holding her hand through each contraction, whispering encouragement as she labored to bring their child into the world. Just after midnight, as Christmas Day began, their son was born, a sturdy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, cradling his newborn son while Nancy rested. "Just like his mother." "What shall we name him?" Nancy asked, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. Lucas thought for a moment. "What about Thomas? After your father?" Nancy's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Thomas Keller." "It's perfect." Later, when the excitement had calmed and their guests had departed, the new family of four settled in the master bedroom. Lily, finally allowed to see her new brother, leaned carefully over the cradle, her expression solemn with responsibility. "I'm a big sister now," she announced proudly. "Yes, you are," Lucas agreed, smoothing her dark hair. "And a very good one you'll be." As Lily drifted to sleep in the small bed they'd prepared for her in their room, Lucas sat beside Nancy, who held their sleeping son against her chest. "Happy?" she asked softly. Lucas looked around the room at his beautiful wife, their perfect children, the home they'd built together. 3 years ago, he'd been left for dead, abandoned by the family he'd trusted. Now, he was surrounded by a family built on love, choice, and second chances. "More than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "You gave me back everything I lost, Nancy. You built me a family from scratch." Nancy smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "We built it together," she corrected. "And we're not finished yet." "No," Lucas agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is just the beginning." Spring came early that year, bringing new life to the land and new opportunities for the growing Keller family. The store continued to prosper under Nancy's guidance. even as she balanced the demands of motherhood. Lucas's reputation as a builder spread beyond Maple Creek, bringing commissions from as far away as Denver. And Liam, who had originally planned to stay only through the winter, found himself increasingly reluctant to leave. "I've been thinking," Lucas said one evening as the brothers shared a quiet drink on the porch after the children were asleep. "The business is growing faster than I can keep up with. I could use a partner, someone who knows carpentry and can manage projects when I'm occupied elsewhere." Liam looked up in surprise. "Are you offering me a permanent position?" "I'm offering you a partnership," Lucas clarified. "Equal share in the building business, separate from the store." "Lucas, I don't deserve." "It's not about deserving," Lucas interrupted. "It's about family, about building something that will last beyond us." He turned to face his brother fully. "Stay, Liam. Be part of what we're creating here." Liam was silent for a long moment, emotion evident in his weathered face. "I'd be honored," he finally said, his voice rough. "More than you know." As summer approached, bringing with it Lily's 3rd birthday, the Kellers celebrated another milestone: the official establishment of Keller Brothers Construction. The sign hung proudly beside the one for Keller and Elliott's Mercantile, symbols of the family's growing prosperity and place in the community. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nancy asked one warm June evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "When you collapsed on my doorstep that day?" Lucas cradled 6-month-old Thomas against his chest, the baby contentedly sleeping after a day of family celebration. Lily played nearby, arranging wildflowers she'd picked into a bouquet for her mother. "Not in my wildest dreams," Lucas admitted. "I was just hoping to survive the night." Nancy took his free hand, her fingers entwining with his. "And now look at us. A home, 2 beautiful children, thriving businesses." Her gaze drifted to where Liam was helping Lily with her flowers. "Even reconciliation where it once seemed impossible. All because you took a chance on a half-dead stranger," Lucas said, squeezing her hand. "You gave me more than shelter that day, Nancy. You gave me hope when I'd lost everything." Nancy's smile was soft in the fading light. "We built something beautiful together, didn't we?" Lucas looked around at the life they'd created, the home he'd constructed with his own hands, the family they'd made together, the businesses that would provide for generations to come. From the ashes of betrayal and abandonment, they had forged something stronger and more precious than what had been lost. "Yes," he agreed, leaning over to kiss her gently. "The most beautiful thing in the world." As darkness fell over the Colorado prairie, stars appearing like diamonds above the mountains, the Keller family gathered in the home they'd built, not just the physical structure of wood and stone, but the bonds of love, trust, and forgiveness that had transformed a broken man and a lonely woman into something greater than themselves. A family built from scratch, stronger than blood, designed to last forever.